Well, hey, first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody. Thanks for such a great turnout today. Quite frankly, we were a little bit in doubt as to whether we were going to get this level of participation given the hurricane that's coming, so we appreciate it. My thanks to General Ham, who wasn't able to be here today, General Swan, and the whole AUSA staff for putting this together. It takes a lot of effort and coordination to put these things together, to get the speakers from all across the industry and the military and other agencies out there, so we really appreciate it. And the AUSA Hurricane Center threaded the needle on this pretty dang well, I think, to get us here today. So we really, truly appreciate the investment that AUSA has made in this event, and my thanks to General Schlosser for, as President of Quad A, of coming up and giving us some remarks as well. So I'd like to start with a quick vignette of kind of a snapshot of what's happening in Army aviation as we sit here today. Just before coming up here, we were honored to host at Fort Rucker, 2nd of the 227th, an aviation task force that is preparing and was pre-positioning for hurricane relief operations. And I have to tell you how impressed I was with this organization. They rolled in, all highly motivated. I went out to the airfield to meet them and went and shook hands with all the crews as they were tying down the aircraft after they landed. And to a man and to a woman, crew chiefs, pilots, maintainers, everybody in that task force was absolutely motivated to be there. In fact, they couldn't bring their whole unit because of the limitation of the people they could bring, but every one of them fought to be on this mission. And all of this happening while this brigade is preparing to deploy other subordinate battalions into different theaters of operation. And so the op tempo on our aviation force is truly remarkable right now, and this is just one example of what our aviation force is doing today. And this brigade is not unique. Just about all of our aviation brigades find themselves in similar conditions right now, where they are executing current operations, preparing for future deployments, and, by the way, we're making the transition to be able to conduct large-scale combat operations in multi-domain environments. So the challenges and the op tempo are very high. The demand for aviation is very high. And there's another aspect of this that I certainly don't want to miss here. 51% of our aviation force resides in the National Guard and Reserve. And much like our active component units that are at high op tempo right now, our Guard units are also at a high op tempo. With that much of the force residing in the Guard and Reserve, we absolutely rely on a total force that is 83% committed on any given day to be able to execute our current operations and prepare for future operations. And as we speak, Guard units from across the land, not just those on the East Coast, are preparing to do their Title 32 mission and take care of our citizens in the United States of America after the devastating effects of hurricane operations are going on. So my hat's off to the entire aviation force. And when I talk about the aviation force, make no mistake, that includes the active component, the National Guard, and the reserves, because we can't do it. We can't do all of the requirements that we have out there without our full complement of aviation forces out there. So my thanks to all that, and I see Ray Davis sitting back there, our chief aviator in the National Guard Bureau. So we are one team in one fight, and we have a whole bunch of aviation units out there preparing to help our own citizens after Dorian makes its way through. So thanks for letting me just talk a little bit and brag on our aviation force there a little bit, because it's important. And aviation is in fact in high demand. So there's two things I'd like to do this morning, and then we'll get to some of your questions and before we get into the panels. The first is I'd like to talk about where we're going. Why future vertical lift in Army aviation is going to be considered, is going to be critical to the future of the U.S. Army and how we do operations in large-scale combat operations. And then I want to talk a little bit about what steps we're taking to get there, how we're actually going to physically make that transition occur. So first and foremost, as was already alluded to, in 2018, we had the National Defense Strategy published by the Secretary of Defense that focused our efforts and our pacing threats as Russia and China, Russia being the more proximate threat and China being the more enduring threat. And what we realized and what our senior leaders realized is that over the last 18 years that we've been involved in COIN operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and other places, we have our adversaries were watching, and they developed capabilities that we're able to close the gap on their capabilities and ours. And so as we looked at the time frame that we think we need to make this transition, 2028 is out there. As you look at the modernization of the Russians and the Chinese and when those things overlap, between 2028 and 2034 is about the time that we need to be multi-domains operations capable, and then by the time we hit 2034, we need to be multi-domain dominant. So so we had to make some choices. And what our Army has chosen to do is, instead of just accepting the status quo of the equipment and training that we have today that would allow that gap between us and our adversaries to expand, is to get after that problem. And there's a couple ways that we could have done that. We could have gone with incremental modifications of our current fleets of aircraft and vehicles to get us a little more capable as time has gone on. Or we could make the leap to leap-ahead technologies that give us a significant capability leap and allow us to maintain our asymmetric advantage against our adversaries. And that's what our leadership has chosen to do. So as we have defined that threat, then what we do in the Army is we develop a concept of, okay, if that is the threat, then what do we have to do to accomplish that? And we develop a concept to that. And so the problem we have to solve is standoff. Over the years, our adversaries have developed layers of standoff using political means, physical posturing, and capabilities that they're developing within their military forces. And so it's our ability to defeat that standoff that generated this concept called MDO 2028. And what that concept is designed to do is to allow us, as we sit here in a competition phase, is to develop capabilities, training, and force posturing that allows us to be able to do several things if we get to a point where we get to armed conflict. The first is to penetrate anti-access aerial denial capabilities with the forces that we have and be able to defeat that standoff. And once that penetration has occurred, to disintegrate integrated air defense systems, integrated fires complexes, so that we could then exploit the opportunities created by that penetration to achieve, consolidate gains, and return to competition on terms more favorable to the U.S. So that's the overarching concept, is that we have to defeat that standoff. We do that through the competition phase, and then if we go to armed conflict, to be able to penetrate, disintegrate, and exploit the opportunity that was created by that to return to competition on terms more favorable to us. So how do we do that? That concept led to then the modernization priorities for the U.S. Army. And how did we develop those modernization priorities? It's based on what the Army provides to the Joint Force, which is combined arms maneuver. And if you listen to General Milley talk about it as he was developing the modernization priorities, he would tell you that maneuver, combined arms maneuver, which is what the Army provides the Joint Force, is composed of fires and movement. So if you look down our modernization priorities, the first priority, long-range precision fires, is the number one priority, followed by next-gen combat vehicle, which talks about movement, followed by the number 3 slot, which is future vertical lift, which encompasses both fires and maneuver with the capabilities that we're generating within the future vertical lift portfolio, which we'll talk about here in a little more detail in the panel, and I'll hit a couple of things there as well. But what we bring to that fight, and then we have the other models, air missile defense, the network, and the synthetic training environment, all of which is designed to support those first 3, which helps us to generate combined arms maneuver. So as we look at this problem of how we do that, aviation is absolutely a key component of, and we are the aerial arm of the maneuver element that allows us to execute combined arms maneuver designed to penetrate, disintegrate, and exploit. So future vertical lift is a critical capability of that, and not just future vertical lift, but Army aviation in general is required to be able to execute that combined arms maneuver for our force out there. It's not only that, but it's critical and it's decisive to survive, fight, and win in large-scale combat operations. What future vertical lift will bring to the fight is reach, protection, survivability, and lethality that is currently being informed by experimentation, by exercises. And as we develop the requirements for these capabilities, that's all being informed by a whole host of work being done by the cross-functional team led by Wally Rugen and a host of other Army agencies across the board. And in fact, that's starting to happen in the joint arena as well, because this is all going to be part of a joint concept as we go here. You know, and I will tell you what some of the things we're discovering as we do this experimentation, we do this modeling, is that Army aviation is not only survivable, but we can be decisive in a future high-threat environment that takes advantage of the capabilities, the technology, the TTPs, and the standoff that some of our long-range precision munitions can get us here, now, and into the future. And it's critical that we continue to develop those capabilities. But make no mistake that Army aviation, and we have data that helps us to lay this out, is more than capable of surviving, fighting, and winning in that high-threat environment. And we are critical to that combined arms maneuver element out there. So I just want everybody to be clear on that. We are survivable, we are decisive, and we can fight and win in a high-threat, multi-domain environment and large-scale combat operations. Now, while we do this, it's important, and we're going to talk a lot about platforms today. We're going to talk a lot about future vertical lift today. But our Army Aviation Force and the enduring platforms that we have today are going to be with us for at least the next 20 years. So when I'm talking about the aviation force that's going to fight and win in our future environments, I am talking about the UH-60s, the CH-47s, and the Apaches that we have today. They're going to be with us well into the future, and so we can't neglect that fleet as we move into the future. We have to keep that. We have to have targeted readiness initiatives that will help us to keep our enduring fleet ready to fight tonight and into the future, because we're going to have these fleets well into the future. So it's important to understand that as well, that we're not just concerned about future vertical lift. We're concerned about the entire aviation force and all three compos. So it's important to understand that. So Army Aviation, specifically SFVL, critical and survivable, and we are on track from a funding perspective, from a priority perspective, from our senior leaders in the Army to make future vertical lift and all it entails a reality out there. Now I'd like to transition very briefly to talk to you about how we're going about doing this. As everybody in this room is well aware, there are a host of things from a DOTLM PF perspective that have to be considered as we're doing this. And I'm just going to highlight a few of those as we move into the future that'll address both our enduring fleet as well as future vertical lift and some of the things that we're thinking about as we do this. There's a big effort right now in combination with AFC and with CAC and TRADOC to develop these solutions and get them into the force. So let me just start a little bit, starting with doctrine. So as we talked about the concept of MDO 2028, subsequently what happens now is each warfighting function now, and of course we're concerned about Army Aviation, develops its concept. And we are currently in the process of doing that. We're developing the aviation concept of how we're going to fight in large-scale combat operations in a multi-domain environment. And that will come out a little later this year. But we are working that, and it'll be nested with MDO and the other things that we learn through experimentation, through exercises, and so forth as we continue to go on. That'll be followed by O&Os that talk about how we fight these organizations in the future, and those are very important as we develop that as well. Our doctrine will continue to be developed and updated as we achieve a capability. A concept is different from doctrine in that the concept is not achievable yet. There's something in that concept that we can't physically achieve because we aren't man-trained or equipped yet to do that. So our goal is to, as quickly as possible, take that concept and turn it into doctrine as we field capabilities, as we develop our training plan, as we develop our leaders, to transition that concept into doctrine as quickly as possible. So that's an ongoing effort that really never ends. And as we develop capabilities, as we train our force, we'll turn that concept into doctrine. And so those are in our capstone doctrine, FM 304, the 304.1 and 304.2 that get into the TTPs of how we do this is important. And I'll talk a little bit more in just a minute about some of the different things we're thinking about when we get to that. The next thing I'd like to talk about is organization. So whenever we're bringing a new capability, and it doesn't mean that we're just going to shove it into an existing military table of equipment and an MTO that currently exists, right? Those formations were built with specific analysis in mind, and as we move forward and bring in the capabilities of future vertical lift, both in the attack platforms and the assault platforms, then we're going to have to make some adjustments and do some analysis that talk about what our organizations look like. But what we do need to do is take a look at our aviation force today and figure out how do we optimize it for large-scale combat operations, closing some of the gaps that exist out there, and be ready to receive future vertical lift at the same time. So if you understand our Total Army Analysis, or our TAA process, that's how we build our formations of the future. We're right on the leading edge, and we think that in the next 1 or 2 TAA cycles, we'll have future aviation organizations being implemented or being put into that process so that we can have those organizations set and ready to go, to be multi-domain capable in 2028 and multi-domain dominant in 2035. So those are some of the things going on the organizational thing there, and we may not look at it exactly the same way. We went to modular forces for very good reasons not too long ago, and we've been working through that. The challenge is it's expensive and it's tough if you change a widget or a training event to propagate that through the whole force. So we may look at things like break-in modularity and tailoring cabs to the divisions that they support as we look forward to the multi-domain fight. So there's going to be more to follow on that particular subject, but those are some of the things we're thinking about from an organizational perspective. Training is another big one. In addition to working with the FVL CFT, we're working across the board with the other CFTs as well, because when you think about the capabilities that are going to come online, the ranges and the speeds and the lethality that we're talking about, we would probably, some of those things probably won't happen on a local range at any one of our installations out there. We're going to have to think about what training facilities we need that talk about the ranges and the speeds and the lethality that our forces are going to bring to bear on this. And so as we look to the future of training, the training facilities and the ranges and the training areas are going to be a big part of our consideration as we move forward and bring these capabilities online. And maintaining our synchronization with the other efforts across other branches, particularly artillery and the Maneuver Center of Excellence and so forth. We're working tightly with all of those folks to ensure that we are nested and that we're all thinking about those things as we move into the future, because it's not just one branch or one CFT that's driving those things. It's us collectively as an Army that have to address these issues out there, and training facilities will be one of those things. Another issue on training that we're working on, and this is going into the synthetic training environment, is how we bring training capability into the force at good cost, but gives us maximum correct repetitions on the tasks that we're asking our aviators to do out there in a way that is deployable, that is executable, that is easy access to get to, and doesn't require a lot of large boxes. In other words, we're going to take advantage of technology that's here today and emerging to develop training capabilities that will enable us to continue to train into the future. Individual training all the way up through collective training. And quite frankly, so there's a couple different aspects to that. One is the training of the operational force, and then, of course, we're concerned about the institution as well. And what we have typically done is develop that training capability after the need has arisen. So we have an opportunity here to make sure that we're set in the training base, both on the aircraft side and the unmanned side, to be ready to train as soon as we get to the point where we're ready to start training aviators and UAS operators and IOs en masse. And so that'll be an important part of what we do in the future as well. And we have the opportunity to get that right in this round. And what we may end up doing is, we had a model with the 21st Cav Brigade out at Fort Hood that allowed us to take a unit that was fielded a new piece of equipment, take it from the individual level all the way up to the collective level of training, and then pump them back out to the operational force as a trained and ready unit. So we may look at a 21st Cav-like concept as we move into the future, and as we bring future vertical lift online, that may be a way to get after the training piece of this challenge. And so we're going to have to expand the training base on the manned side and the unmanned side, and those are all things that are we're thinking through right now. Depending on what capabilities we bring in, developing the programs of instruction, getting the instructors trained, we have the ability to do that. But with the speed at which we're moving, quite frankly, it seems like we have a long time. We really don't have that much time. We have to get that ball rolling now to be able to do that. On the materiel side, I'm going to hold off on that. So we're going to have a panel on the materiel side, but just suffice it to say that in addition to future vertical lift, we're looking at targeted investments for readiness of the enduring fleet to make sure that it stays capable and ready to fight tonight. I just want to spend a minute on the leader development piece of this. You know, the second lieutenants that are coming into the Army today, the W1s that are coming into the Army today, and our young soldiers coming into the Army today are the battalion XOs and S3s in 2028. They're the company SPs in 2028, and there are platoon sergeants and first sergeants in 2028. Those same lieutenants, warrant officers, and soldiers are the battalion commanders and brigade commanders in 2035 when we are MDO dominant. They are the brigade standardization pilots, safety officers, aviation mission survivability officers, and maintenance officers of our brigades and battalions in 2035, and our sergeants major in 2035. So the leader development that we do today, and we have a force that has largely grown up. In fact, most of our brigade commanders today have been doing nothing but coin in their careers. And so we know that we have to change what we've done to develop the leaders that are going to lead our formations in that time frame. So in my mind, that's one of the most urgent requirements that we have today, is to look at our career development models, and CW5 Doug England from the Talent Management Task Force is here today, and they're helping us to take a look at all that to say, okay, we've trained leaders in aviation for a long time. Do we need to do something different in career models, in our training models, in our professional military education, what we're doing out in the operational force to allow us to train the leaders that are going to have to work, General Schlosser mentioned it, across very long distances, ranges, C2 networks, and we're going to have to do leader development probably a little differently than we do today to enable us to generate the leaders that are going to lead our formations tomorrow. So that, in my mind, as the branch proponent, is one of my most important tasks, is to make sure that we're getting leader development right, that's going to produce the leaders that lead our formations in large-scale combat operations in multi-domain environments. So we're taking a look at all of those things right now. On the personnel side, we know we're going to have to generate new MOSs and all that entails, from training all the way through our operational force, developing the standards and the tasks that those individuals will have to do from that. Facilities is another question. I've already mentioned training facilities. Just the different form factors of the manned and unmanned systems that are coming in, potential requirements for each of those will require us to have some facilities things in place. And again, not too far in the future. Our MILCON requirements, for instance, that's a 6-year process. So we're on the leading edge of having to have that so that, again, we have conditions set when we start to field future vertical lift, in the late 20s, early 30s out there. And, of course, our policy will have to change the way we work in the national airspace system and so forth. So we have a lot of things going on. We have a lot of work going on besides what's happening in the CFT across the force. Now, I will tell you that as a member of the Aviation Six-Pack or the Aviation Enterprise, we are as tight as we ever have been, and it's never been as important to be tight that we are right now. In fact, just yesterday, I did a brief to General Richardson on our Dotland PFP solutions and roadmap through 2028 in conjunction with Raleigh-Rugen. So we are tight with Army Futures Command, with TRADOC, and within the aviation enterprise. And so what you'll see is that we are very well connected, and we have internal debates all the time as we wrestle with issues. but make no mistake that the aviation enterprise is very strong. They're all represented here today, and you'll get to hear from all of them today as we go forward. So just a couple of takeaways, and then we'll open it up to questions here. So first, FVL is an absolutely critical capability to multi-domain operations in 2028 and the U.S. Army's ability to execute large-scale combat operations in the future. We are a part of a maneuver element. We are a maneuver element from the aerial domain that is critical to giving us the capability to do combined arms operations to allow us to penetrate, disintegrate, and exploit in a multi-domain operation in large-scale combat operations. We can survive, fight, and win in large-scale combat operations in a high-threat environment. And we have DOTLM PFP solutions that are being worked and synchronized very hard within the aviation enterprise and across the Army as we bring these capabilities on board. So, again, we're going to focus on platforms today, but, hey, we recruit, train, and produce the Army's best aviation force. There is no aviation force out there that is like Army Aviation in terms of scale and capacity and ability to do what our nation needs us to do. You can just read the news today and see from all three components, the active component, the National Guard and Reserve, what our aviation force is doing today. They are very busy at home and abroad, and I could not be more proud of the aviation force that is out there doing our nation's bidding today. We're heavily committed at 83% on any given day. That means we're preparing for, we're either deployed to or recovering from an operation. We're doing CTC rotations. We're doing support to homeland defense and so forth. So we have a lot of things going on. We have great leaders, officers, and soldiers out there, and any of our soldiers in the audience here today or out there online today, I want to thank you for what you're doing on behalf of our nation, on behalf of the Army today. So, hey, we have three panels today. We're going to talk about delivering and developing critical capabilities, innovative and effective training for large-scale combat operations, and sustainment of the current and future force out there. So, hey, again, my thanks to all of you for attending today, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Hi, General Jen Judson with Defense News.
Hi, Jen.
How are you doing?
Good.
I wanted to ask, are you still struggling with producing sufficient number of pilots to man cabs, as well as producing training pilots? And what is needed to fix those issues? Is it funding or some other things at play?
Thank you for the question. So the answer is yes, but our senior leaders have recognized that, and the funding is in place and several other things to allow that to occur. So to make an aviator, there are several things. There's an ecosystem of things that have to happen. You have to have the right number of aircraft. You have the right number of instructor pilots. You have to have the students. You have to have the parts. You have to have the maintenance capacity. So all of those things have to come together to get one aircraft off the ground. And at Fort Rucker, we fly a quarter of the Army's flying hour program every year, generating our aviators. That results in a high demand for maintenance and so forth. So we have underwhelmed that over the last several years. That has resulted in a shortage of pilots. But our senior Army leaders have recognized that, and we are expecting some additional funding that's already been POM for 21 and beyond, as well as some unfunded requirements that are one sitting in Congress right now, and we'll have another one for next year. We anticipate those being funded. They're fully supported by our Army senior leaders to get Fort Rucker back on track to allow us to produce the number of aviators required for our force out there.
Hi, sir. Tom Jesse with Viasat. Sir, you talked about leader development and MOS development. So as I'm out in the force, down at the ranks, I see a pretty drastic knowledge base or lack of knowledge in Link 16, but it's on the Apache, it's on the UAS, it's proliferating within the military. Is there any plans to maybe add in the 25 series MOS a tactical data link MOS? Because right now the 140 Alphas at the Atom Cell are really the only guys that understand Link 16 and have a knowledge base, but they don't own the network. So there becomes a fight between trying to get that into the network and operate, properly, JICOs trained, the whole 9 yards. And even the Apache pilots themselves, they get trained when they get the Echo model, fielding, but then if they go back into the state side, there's not a good training network, so those skill sets atrophy. So just wondering if that's being addressed.
Yeah, so thanks for the question, Tom. I appreciate it. So, first let me start by saying the network is one of our CFTs. It is one of the modernization priorities. And as a result of that, as we develop solutions for the network, that's going to have some impacts down the line on how we train our force, our aviation force, and really not just the aviation force, but our staffs, our artillerymen, our infantrymen, all are going to have to be proficient to a certain level on a whole host of various systems, not just Link 16, which you're interested in, but a whole host of other systems out there. And so to answer your question, yes, that is absolutely being considered. And as we develop solutions in the network CFT and what the resultant material solutions are going to be, that's going to have to be pushed down into the, because you're right, we do have a gap, and we have a select few that understand some of the capabilities out there that we have to address. The transformation that's going on right now in the modernization program is actually giving us a huge spotlight to identify where those areas are and to make corrections on them. So yes, that's absolutely part of the process as we move forward. Thanks for the question.
Hey, sir, let me ask a little different question, because you kind of highlighted and said you're moving from concept to doctrine and you're working the how-to. At the same time, you said that we are maintaining the current fleet and modernization at the same time we're trying to go after FVL. What I would tell you is publicly, though, you look at and you see FLRAA got split. It's no longer attack and cargo. It's now simply the long-range assault aircraft. At the same time, Block 2 for Chinook was put off, and the utility cargo aircraft and others. So current fleet right now seems to be paying for FVL at the same time that S&T is. My concern is, how do we avoid another Comanche-like scenario?
Yeah, thanks for the question. That's a great question. And that's the fine line that we walk every day, and you're going to hear from Mac McCurry here in just a minute from the G3. But those are risk decisions that are being made every day. And you're absolutely right. We have to avoid a situation where we put all our eggs in a future basket that don't account for the modernization that has to occur in our current fleet. There are going to be trades in there, and that's something that we hotly debate on any given day through the Army processes, and our senior leaders make those decisions as we move forward. But what everybody acknowledges is that the enduring fleet that we have today, our 60s, our 64s, and our CH-47s, are going to be with us for a couple of decades yet. And that means that there are going to have to be some investments in those platforms as we move forward to keep them capable of fighting tonight and ready to win. So we are always committed to making sure that our sons and daughters out there have the most modernized equipment that we can possibly give them. You know, our first unit equipped for FVL isn't scheduled till FY30. So there's a decade right there that we're going to be using to fight with this equipment. And then even beyond that, as we field FVL, it's not going to happen in one day. It's going to take several years to field the fleet with future vertical lift. So these platforms are going to be with us, and we have commitments from our Army leaders across the board to make sure that we're giving the very best equipment to our soldiers that we're sending into harm's way. Now, that doesn't mean that if I change a widget on a Black Hawk or an Apache that everybody gets it. We're going to have to make choices. And so everybody's not getting everything at the same time. And there's going to be some decisions that get made on how to do that as we talk about I talked about organization. That's really going to drive things. What formations are going to be built for what purpose, and then that's how they'll be properly equipped. That doesn't mean that everybody's going to get it, but we're going to have to make some of those choices down the line. But what we must do is make sure that we're giving the best capability to our sons and daughters that we're sending into harm's way on any given day.
Sir, we have one more question.
Nice job. But
Thank you, sir.
My question is, you talked about the MDO concept, and I'm glad you're doing aviation concept to support that. And there are some critics who say you have docked the importance of FVL because there's no explicit link to Army aviation to executing the MDO concept. Will the MDO concept evolve to be more explicit in how the new modernization priorities fit into implementing that? So it's not just FVL, but the others as well. And is that way that it's going to happen is through the concept that you're talking about?
So first, sir, thanks for the question. MDO or FEL is addressed in MDO, but it's what I was trying to say up front. When we talk about what the Army provides the Joint Force, it is combined arms maneuver. Okay, that is why future vertical lift is the number 3 priority. We are part of the fires and movement piece of maneuver and are an integral part of combined arms maneuver. So without Army aviation, that's why it's the number 3 priority, you know, in the top 6 modernization priorities. So the concept was not designed to tuck to each warfighting function on exactly how we're going to do that. That concept development, like you mentioned, is happening as we speak. So we have the concept of what we need to do: penetrate, disintegrate, exploit, return to competition. And now, so that's what we've got to do. Here are the capabilities we want to bring on to do it. And then now the development is, how are we going to actually fight those capabilities, given the technology, the capability that they bring to the fight, and how it integrates with the other CFT efforts that are going on, as well as the Joint Force. So this, you know, a multi-domain or a large-scale combat operation is never going to be just an Army solution alone. It's going to operate in a joint context. And there's experimentation going on right now and a lot of energy at the joint level to experiment with this and have the other services develop similar concepts so that we can have a joint concept that allows us to integrate not only with other Army systems, but in the joint community as well. Thanks, sir.
Sir, thank you for being here. Please give General Francis a big round of applause.
All right, thank you.